and welcome to Connects Live. I'm Mark Michelson, the host of the program, and today we are featuring Gary David. Gary is a PhD, and he's a design sociologist, experienced designer, a professor at the university level. And we always love our academics here because not only do they get to do designs, they get to study it and share all that and help people learn. And it also happens to be one of my passions he's talking about today is qualitative research and how do you incorporate that into design thinking and making things improved. So welcome, Gary. How you doing today?
I am good. Thanks for having me. I'm glad somebody loves academics. Sometimes it feels, especially when people accuse us of having summers off, and I can assure you, at least in my world, that is not the case.
Well, yeah, we have when you think about the academic world. I mean, it really does give you a different level view. It's like flying in a plane instead of dealing in the depths of the mountains, so to say.
Sometimes a plane that's crashing or losing altitude rapidly.
Oh
So
no.
and we have to fasten our seatbelts, and academics are very, very well accustomed to putting our own air masks on, oxygen masks before anybody else's.
Well, the
So
idea of doing even preparing to teach this kind of stuff, there's so many different new disciplines around CX, and it just seems to be growing exponentially. No pun intended.
right.
With all these new complex areas of including brand experience or
Right.
how do you get a handle of that from an academic perspective?
One of the interesting things that's recently, I might say recently, like within the last year, there's actually been a new academic organization. It's really about for practitioners called the acronym is Expresso. It's the Experience Research Society that was developed out of Finland. I'm a member on the executive committee. It's an international organization, primarily of academics, but also some practitioners who are interested in experience design and who are doing experience design. And one of the fascinating aspects of that has been how widely it's being done and how little each part knows about the other. And
Hmm.
so recently I was in a committee meeting and I was mentioning employee experience, and people were like, wait, is that a thing? I just kind of went, well, it depends where you work, but yes, it is a thing. And like customer experience and all these other things. And a lot of people are in recreation or travel or tourism or hospitality, and they don't necessarily think of themselves as customer experience or employee experience or even experience designers. And so what I think you're going to see, what you're speaking about, is at some point this convergence or like this almost United Nations of experience design where people are going to need to come together and not necessarily coalesce under one thing, but at least be able to speak each other's language a bit more.
It's interesting. When you think about the role of a CX person, we talked a little bit about this a few weeks ago, but yeah, I've put together a list of some 90 titles of
Hmm.
CX related
Right.
things and different strata within the organizations, right? Well, when you get to the very top of that, I've always viewed that CX professional and CXO role as sort of the glue or the controller, if you will, between operations and marketing and tech
Right.
and financial, the stuff the CEO used to do. Where do you see that coming in, just so from your point of view? Who's got the ball? Who's the coach?
Yeah, so I think if we had the answer to that question, I think a lot of people would be happy. It depends, I would say, and we all know this, depends on where you're at. One of the things when I talk to people about CX and they ask, well, what is it? And I say, well, it depends on where it lives in the organization, what it is. Right? I can tell you what the people I've spoken to think of themselves as CX professionals, but what it actually looks like and how it manifests itself is significantly impacted by where it lives in an organization and who it reports to and who's in charge of it. And one of the points I really appreciate you just made is I teach in a program for user experience, and where I also talk about experience design and CX, and I teach an employee experience course as well. User experience professionals are now being rebranded as experience designers.
Hmm.
Not that their job is changing, but that the title's changing. And so even there, I think we're going to have to, pay close attention to how the terminology changes with the conceptualization staying stagnant. And so again, going back to speaking the same language, a lot of our conversations are probably going to be like, oh, you're an experience designer. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to me? How does it exist in your world? And so we can get a sense of how we orient to each other's work in space from a shared meaning kind of framework.
Hmm. So within that, which is interesting because, I guess the idea of even X, right?
Right.
I think it came from UX. Maybe it came from somewhere else, but it seems like it generated there, and then CX kind of came on top of
Right.
that.
So I was lucky enough to I teach a course, Ethnography for Experience Design. I was lucky enough to get Don Norman to speak to my grad students. And Don Norman, for those who don't know, founded the term user experience.
Ah.
He's the guy, right? And so it was a very fascinating talk. And he's actually working with a group about redefining user experience and design education as a part of a larger effort that's existing again in a different silo. And it started with him, but the research on experience goes back to, I don't know, Aristotle, right? What makes an experience?
Hmm.
And so if we want to think about where our conceptualization of experience comes from, we kind of go further back than Don Norman. And not that we want to get stuck in those philosophical weeds, but that there are important elements in how we are conceptualizing how people make sense of their experiences and how they report them, like with qualitative or quantitative work.
Hmm.
That if we understand some of those theoretical frameworks, and it's our job as academics to translate them, it can help people in their practical work as well. Because a lot of these things we're talking about today have been talked about previously. We just don't know about them because the words people use are often very difficult to figure out, even if you've been studying them for 30 years. You know what I mean? So we got to
Hmm.
translate the text, the sacred text from philosophy into a broader area. And that's some of the work that I'm working on, is that translation to render it in a way that people can understand more broadly.
Hmm. It's fascinating to me because I hope it's not just a fad, and we've run into these things before, Kaizen, TQM, whatever it might be.
Mhm.
Now it seems like NPS is the lodestar, the guide stone for CX, and yet I always feel it just is not adequate enough to fully understand what's happening within design, especially with design. NPS, what do you do with NPS for design, right? Except
Right.
maybe look at the comments. But let's talk for a second about the qualitative around design, and that's why, as a quality myself, I'm
Right.
fascinated by this. But I'm kind of wondering, within the idea of big data coming into this and
Mhm.
all the different channels of data and feeds and open ends, et cetera, what kind of ideas do you have to really make better sense of all that stuff and get people involved?
So a course that I created last in the fall, um, and it goes to my consulting, operation, ethnoanalytics. Data plus context equals information. All right.
Hmm.
So you might have big data, doesn't mean you have useful information. So Christian Madsberg, who is a founder of Red Associates, has a really great book called Sense Making. I highly recommend it. And he speaks about this quite frequently as well. Like, what does 3 o'clock mean? Right? That's a metric. It's a measure of time. What's it mean as an indicator? Well, that depends. And so we need that context. We need to understand that context in order to turn that data into actionable information. And that's where the qualitative becomes really, if not the data itself, but the qualitative mindset becomes really important, because it's not just the context in which it lives, it's the context in which it was created. That quantitative data was created by somebody for some purpose through some set of actions. You don't know what that data means until you understand those features and those factors. And that's also this qualitative mindset of understanding the context to make it actionable as information.
When I think of qualitative research, I always think of the design of the study
Mhm.
to approach a certain objective, right? And you can have different designs, whether it's ethnography or bulletin board or diary keeping or whatever it might be. But that design is going to, in large part, shape the output, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
by what questions and how they're asked. So I'm kind of wondering that versus just sort of wandering around or serendipitously falling into insights, right?
Right.
How do you have you looked at that in the academic sense? Is it?
Yeah, so there's a really great book that I used in the fall called Data Feminism by one. It's from MIT Press. MIT is a school outside of Boston in a town called Cambridge. For those who might not have heard of it, And the book really does talk about how, data and power are closely interrelated. And people in CX know this, right? It's not just how the survey was created. It's not just to whom it was distributed, who has the power to analyze it and make pronouncements about what it means, right? And we see this in organizations all the time. Uh, somebody wants it to mean a certain thing, and so they're going to use it in a certain kind of way. That's context as well. And so being aware of those features, and not, the numbers never speak for themselves, quite frankly. They're always spoken on behalf of, right? And so how to understand the social dynamics, and again, I'm a sociologist, to understand those social dynamics, the social relationships, the social systems that lead to this outcome of what that data is taken to mean, becomes essential to understanding how data is used in an organization. Whether it's CX, UX, whether it's using NPS or any other kind of metric, or retention rates, or any of these other kind of metrics. Real quick, there was just a story, I don't know if people saw this. Amazon, there was the accusation that managers at Amazon would hire people with the intention of firing them within the year to meet their turnover requirements, their metrics. It was just out this week in like some Business Insider. That's important context to know.
It is. All right. You've been hired for a year.
Right. And they do it real quick. They do it to protect people they don't want to lose, because they have this metric, and the metric might be there for very good reasons. This measure might be there for very good reasons, but the execution of it is for all the wrong reasons. And you got to understand that, what that number means in terms of the practices that led to its creation. That's the key point.
So, from a sociological point of view, and dealing with big data the way you do, and data presented in a digestible format, what do you see as far as best of class for data sharing within large organizations versus, what happens if you don't have a plan for sharing data? And are there any ramifications for being too much in your bubble as well?
Yeah, I think, data sharing without knowledge management can be a critical problem, right? So I can share data. It doesn't mean we're all oriented to the same way, nor should we, right? One of the things I talk about in this course I created was data and diversity. Okay. And so diversity of perspective leading to a more well-developed analysis. And what do I mean by diversity? Well, it can mean a lot of different things. But let's just take, like, for instance, whether it's age, right? Or gender, or organizational position, or hierarchical position, or race. We carry with us different perspectives on what this data can mean. And so if we're sharing data for the purposes of integrating diverse perspectives on the analysis, that's a really good thing, that then we can collate or coalesce those interpretations, those analyses, into some more articulated finding, versus people taking data in their own silos and not speaking to one another about it, right? And that's going to create a problem, because people are going to look at it, it's like art, right? They're going to look at it and interpret it on the basis of what they think it means, and then use it for their own purposes, which is not going to lead to integration in terms of organizational work.
Right. I mean, it is. I mean, a lot of times you can look at the same thing and it seems to you or not, right? It's either resonating or not, but it's got to cause some action. I think we were just talking about
Right.
how, you know, exercise for exercise sake, or creating a journey map, whatever,
Right.
is part of the step, but then doing something with it, or
Right.
it not only just directionally for design, but closed loop processes as well for making sure that customers are happy. What do you have as far as is there a best plan out there for kind of data sharing and allowing for that interpretation? Is there anything like that exists, or
Yeah, I
are we
don't
all
know.
confined?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it depends on what we're talking about in specific. I should add that Don Norman, when he was speaking to my students, he had a great quote. He said, "Design thinking is easy, design doing is hard." People can go to design thinking workshops and be like, "That was great." You ask them 3 months later, "What happened as a result of it?" Nothing. It's like, "I went to this journey mapping workshop. Did you do a journey map?" "Yep." "Did you use it?" "Nope." Because I didn't do the journey doing workshop. I only went to the journey mapping workshop.
Right.
And for those consultants out there, there's a good upsell possibility, right? You know,
Hmm.
come for the journey mapping workshop, stay for the journey doing workshop. And so, the doing part becomes like where the rubber meets the road. Is there best practices for data sharing? I don't know. Well, actually, let me take that back. One of the books that I read recently is called Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fascinating examination of how they achieved cross-organizational data sharing in a rapidly evolving environment, which was the US Armed Forces and Allied forces in Iraq. And one of the problems they were, and this even goes back to a book that I forgot the guy's name. He's an anthropologist who studied the intelligence community after 9/11 in the United States. And it wasn't information gathering, it was information sharing. And so it starts with, culture, obviously. And it also starts with diversity and integration. Do you have opportunities within an organization to have people move cross-functionally to be able to share information, to share knowledge, to share perspectives? Or are people working separately? Is there the opportunity to make those connections? One of the pieces that I speak about is connecting disconnections. How do we connect those disconnected parts to not only lead to better, data analysis, but creative innovation and additional opportunities that come from that? And so organizations need to kind of allow for those connections, both organic and planned, to take place. Obviously, more difficult in the virtual environment, although not impossible, but it needs to be like people need chief integration officers. They need to move chief information officers into more of a chief integration officer, because information doesn't happen by itself. Information is a product of people making sense out of something. One second, I lost your audio. I gotta switch
Oh,
microphones.
sorry. No, it's me. I have a button here. There's that's. Sorry. I had my button pressed wrong. Um, the first thing that comes to mind when I hear this is org charts, and when I think of an org chart, that whole realm of org charts is always being played with at a corporate level, right? It's either top down, it's flat, it's bottom up, etc. But what I'm hearing you say here is really also changing around the roles of some of those traditional places in the org chart, like a CIO, right?
Right.
Um, it's fascinating to me, but I do want to get to some questions other
Sure.
than mine. Let's see here. Rich, you had the first question up. Go ahead and come on up here and share your question for Gary.
Hey Gary, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, Rich, how you doing?
Good to see you.
You too.
I can't think of a better person to ask this question. It's a big one, and it's a topic we talk about in CX all the time. And it's around, like, at the core, isn't CX around change management? This is discipline. I mean, you're talking about data and
Yeah.
insights and information, but when you think about complex organization like a bank or Bentley University or the military, there's a fire hose of data coming at executives that are empowered to actually make the big structural changes to help improve experiences. So how do you get through to these folks to empower those changes? What facts, what data, what insights are able to be inspired to cut above all the other influences that are coming at the management team that do this? So in other words,
Right.
how do you change manage this from a sociology point of view?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. And I will add that one of the things that I do is a podcast called Experience by Design podcast, experiencexdesign.com, or wherever you get podcasts. I mentioned that because I had Sue Harvey, who I know you know, and we actually had an episode specifically on change management in organizations, and that, she's a really great resource as well. A thing that I would add is there's a really great book by a guy named John Doerr, Doerr, and the book is titled Measure What Matters. And so it may not be that, do we have the right data? Are we measuring the right things for the right reasons? Are we measuring what matters? And a lot of that goes to organizational philosophy, and organizational culture and mission and purpose. Is what are the metrics we're trying to achieve? And are those even the right metrics to begin with? And are those metrics misaligned across organizations? When I was teaching my UX students, they will say things like, one of the things that we are often tasked with is customer retention, i.e. making it really hard online to figure out how to unsubscribe, right? Which is directly against a CX idea of trying to make for a better customer experience. Well, we have a problem here, right? Two different parts of the organization, both with the label experience, are working towards two different goals. And so how do we then reconcile those things? When I talk about integrated experience design, it requires leadership to not just lead, but also collect voices, ethnography, collect stories about how these things are misaligned and how we need to create realignment in the organization so that the metrics are actually measuring the things that we care about. Call center time has nothing to do with CX. It has to do with call center time, which may have something to do with CX, or it may not, right? And so that's where I think, a more fundamental conversation needs to happen. When I talk with clients, it's like, okay, what are your metrics? What are you measuring? Tell me why. And then having some really candid conversations about, are you measuring the right thing? Is that a measurement for some other thing that really isn't related to the thing you're saying you care about?
Mhm.
Well said. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Excellent.
And listen to Sue. She's really smart.
Yeah. Let's see here. We also have Michael Cooper. Come on up. You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
There you go. Yes.
I'm not sure I had a question, but Gary, that was a fascinating chat and spot on for me. Thank you for your time. But I was making a statement to actually Rich on the back of his one about this is change management at its core, and my observation is only that I think CX management is, in my view, one of the toughest roles in the organization today, because you have to have such a good understanding of all the various disciplines across the business, from data and insights and technologies and marketing and brand and so on and so forth. And I'm sure, Gary, you would agree.
Quite. Yeah. And I absolutely agree. And one of the things, if you look at the Pine and Gilmore experience economy stuff, it is about transformation ultimately, right? You're making transformative experiences. And I would even say transformative changes, right? Around change management. When I talk to UX people, you will not be surprised to hear that they think customer experience is just a piece of user experience. And I say to them, that's not what the CX people tell me. One of the points that I push user experience folks on is, to what extent do you identify your role as transforming an organization? And they just kind of look at me like, not really. I mean, ideally, when it was usability more than user experience, and I think there's a cautionary tale for CX here. What usability started as and what UX has become is a potential outcome, an undesirable one perhaps, of customer experience, because it started out as change. It started out as transformation. And on the podcast, I talked with a friend of mine, Elizabeth Rosenzweig, who founded World Usability Day, about the transformative nature of usability and design. And then it becomes about, is it the red button or the blue button? Which one gets more clicks? And so does CX potentially fall into that rut of move? And I don't know, right? But this is, I'm sure all of you thought about and talked about it, into just measuring very narrow things to improve particular outcomes, not related to improved experiences, but to improve profitability.
Christine, you had a couple of comments in here. I just want to invite you up to join the chat. Christine Walker.
Jeez, I wasn't expecting to be called on, but
Right?
Gary, this is actually really insightful for me, because you're covering a lot of the subject areas that I have had exposure to. And so like the fact that you're covering user experience and brand and insights, I mean, this is very telling for me as I'm trying to figure out, I'm doing a little self-exploration, which is what brought me to the CXPA organization and what's bringing me here today. So this is just very validating for me to just kind of hear the broad spectrum by which you're talking about CX and how it touches on some of the stuff that I'm totally aligned with. So I'm really enjoying this discussion. So thank you guys.
I appreciate that. And just, just to reiterate what you just said and what Michael also said, I'm a jack of all trades and a master of none. In academic terms, they call me a dilettante. I'm supposed to be very narrowly focused and defined within a narrow range of topics and subject matter that I develop over the course of my career, about which no one actually cares. That's what we call academia. And I am far more of an integrationist in terms of having multiple interests. And then from a systems perspective, from a complex theory perspective, a complex systems perspective, trying to bring all of that together. And I think that that's where, as Rich said, it's complex organizations. I've been actually doing a lot more reading of complex systems theory. And there's a really nice book. It's Systems Thinking for Social Change. If people haven't heard of it, I've been listening to it I'm old enough to say on tape, but it's on my phone actually. And I think that's talk about change management. That's a really good book for thinking about not just social change, but organizational change from this integrationist perspective.
Excellent. And thanks, Christine. Let's see. Well, I think we have time for like one more question. And Susan, looks like you have some hot topics you'd like to share.
All right.
Susan Walker. Hey. You're on mute again. There you go.
Can you hear me?
We can now. Yes.
I guess for me, one of the biggest issues I see right now is this integration or creation of this customer success role. Mm-hmm. So if what we're talking about today is similar to what these people are supposed to be or what they are being defined to be, are they going to be the integrators in terms of data and information? Because they're kind of straddling both sides of the fence. They're the organization, but they're also really focused on the customer. So how does that play into this whole data information sharing? Because really, they have to cross all departments.
Yeah.
So if there's a problem with order entry, or there's a problem with a product not working properly, and you're trying to use customer success in a way to generate more revenue with your existing customer base, this is an area where they have to cross paths, right? Even think about the marketing department. What's the messaging you're sending off to a customer that may or may not get them to respond to what it is you're doing? Is this customer success team that integration force? I guess is my question. I'm not clear. I'm trying to sort through it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I from what you described, it could be. I mean, I always want to know, like, where's the dotted line in the org chart, and also what the metrics are being, measured by, and what the expectations are, and how broad is their remit. And so I think I don't know the answer. I would guess, if I had to guess, it would depend upon, and I tell my students every time I say it depends, drink. And by the end of class, everyone's very well hydrated. It depends on the organizational philosophy that's driving the team, and whether it's a checkbox activity or whether or not there is actual intent behind it. Like, I'm sure we all know, a company can say, we have customer experience people, or we have user experience people, and they're an afterthought that after things are done to validate or what's happened, or if they give feedback that asks for change, organizational change, it's not integrated, it's discounted, it's not internalized. So that would be my cut at your question. But yeah, I couldn't tell you for sure. I think it's a great one to explore in more detail, though.
Yeah, the org chart and the dotted line. And also, it's around here, we do it this way. Around here, we do this way. And it is very organizational specific, on their culture aspect. We have one more question all the way from Italy. Jennifer.
Yes.
Let's have your question, and then we're going to go to networking.
I wish I were in Italy.
Oh, you're not. We had another one here from Italy. I'm sorry. I messed that up.
Let's pretend you are in Italy.
Hey, Cici.
Let's do that. I did marry an Italian American, first generation. So
there you go.
So yes, I'd love to hear you talk, David. If this is something that I know you mentioned Pine and Gilmore,
right.
and the economic progression of value, and I have done some thinking about that model and its correlation or relationship with the model that Richard Buchanan created some years ago, called the Orders of Design. And really, basically, what it says is, the Orders of Design basically says that as you are creating experiences across broader and broader domains, that you need broader and broader design skills. So you would need, organization design. When you're thinking about systems,
yeah.
right? You need org design, you need UX design or usability engineering, whatever word you want to use for that. You might need communications design. There's like a whole sets of now, much broader kind of design skill sets and evaluation skill sets that you need to create experiences across the different layers of the orders of design. And I think that we get lost in the CX UX false dichotomy in my mind. And that really it's not about that. It's about, like, is CX part of UX? Is UX part of CX?
Right.
I don't care. What I care about is whom are we designing for? What are we designing, whether it's a user interface or a system, or like a government or anything that's like large systems, and what design skills do we need to bring to bear on that space? I think that aligns very nicely with Pine and Gilmore's progression of economic value, because each progression is a more complex kind of a broader set of things they're designing for the purpose of economic value. I don't know if that's something you can speak to or not, but that's where my big thought is going right now, my hot topic.
Yeah, no, I love that. I appreciate it. And I wasn't familiar with the Buchanan. I'm looking at it right now, and I'm just looking wicked problems in design thinking. It makes a lot of sense. So those who are not familiar with the concept of a wicked problem, it's those major social problems that are really vexing, that require, and this is what Don Norman was also talking about with his redesign of design education, more of a systems orientation around not whether the button should be blue or red or green, but how do we solve some of these wicked problems? How do we approach them? The book, Systems Thinking for Social Change, very similar. And so thinking about what it is we're trying to accomplish is a really important thing. Having those who are at the broader set of skills, really important. Not that everyone needs to, but I do think experience design, we're going to see folks having to be a general practitioner of experience design. You might have, like in healthcare, people who specialize within a particular medical domain, but then also those who can integrate all of the test results, all of the data for the care of the patient. Right. So I often think about it from a medical model, because the human being is a complex system with living in a social world that also impacts that body. So I really do like that connection you're making between those two. And I think that's where I would say experience design needs to go. And that's where I see myself, because I kind of cut across. I'm one of the few people I know who can cut across a lot of different areas: UX, employee experience, student, customer, patient, things like that, to try to then bring it all together.
That's me as well. And in just a last word, I would say I was a student of yours some years back in your ethnography of
I remember
work for design. You do? Oh my gosh. Well, I loved your class. It was like the best class that I took. I never finished the degree because I couldn't because of various reasons, but your class has inspired me and is the reason why I make connections like that now. So thank you.
Thank you. I did not pay her to say that.
No.
This was not a plant. I just want to go on record. Well, I very much appreciate that. I do. I as you mentioned, I'm like, oh yes, I remember. Yeah, I do remember your name. So it's great to see you again.
Excellent. Well, we are at the end of our time now for our recorded session and the fireside chat. Thank you so much, Gary. This has been, I know we're all picking your brain here because
always happy.
Got a good one.
Well, sometimes.
Yeah, right. I keep trying to think and nothing happens. So there you go. So what I'd like to do is close out this portion. If you're watching this recording, please join us any Wednesday and you can meet people. We're ready to go into a little networking time here, and you never know who you're going to meet. So we're here every week. We do the fireside chat. We do this networking, and we're also coming back with some live events starting this year. We're going to be in Boston in September 21st. Then we're going to be in Chicago on October 19th, and then in Atlanta on the 9th of November, and in Austin, Texas on December 14th. We also are going to be in markets across the country all next year. If you'd like to get involved, find us at cxforums.org, and we would welcome anyone to come and join us anytime. Thanks much, everyone. And Audrey, take us out.